Welcome, everyone. Again, my name is 𝐂𝐼𝐜𝐵𝐲, Managing Director of Marketing at Alpha Residential, and I'm also the advisor at large for doing good work in Africa. So we're really excited to have you here. We're glad to be having this conversation. And the whole point of this is to talk about, what's going on the continent and off the continent. And our topic today is not beaten, not quitting, how Africa turns brain drain into brain gain. So we've all heard the story, talented Africans leaving for opportunities abroad. And yes, this movement raises real questions about the future of work, innovation, and leadership across the continent. But here's what's also true. Talent doesn't vanish when it crosses borders. Knowledge doesn't stop flowing. And Africa's global networks have never been more powerful or connected. So today we're asking a very different question. What if migration isn't a loss to manage, but a system to design? What if brain drain is actually brain circulation, talent that leaves, learns, and flows back? The story is not about leaving, but about how we all stay connected. That's the conversation we're going to have today, and with the leaders that we have live who are living this experience day in, day out. And so on that note, I'm going to ask the speakers to introduce themselves, tell us where you're based, and in one sentence, tell us why this conversation excites you. Starting with Camille.
Well, hello, everyone. I'm based in the U.S. in Maryland, and I'm excited about this conversation because it's much needed, right? A lot of folks are looking for, guidance, perspective, and this is where, we all come together and brainstorm how we can really do what's best for our young people in the diaspora that's spread across, the entire world, and then bring this conversation up front.
Thank you, Camille. My name is Barnabas. I'm connecting this evening from Abuja, Nigeria. I work with the African Leadership Academy based in Johannesburg, South Africa. I work as the director of sector networks, and this conversation is really important for me because my daily work is actually focused on building bridges and also bridging the gap between young people and employers as well. So I see this as an opportunity for us to be able to reflect, but also to be able to discuss what we need to do to be able to build, that bridge and also create opportunities for young people, both the ones that are in diaspora, but also to be able to connect with those who are in Africa to be able to get sustainable opportunities and also help young people to build career of impact as well. So definitely looking forward to the conversation today. Thank you.
All right, Charles.
All right, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Charles, but you can call me Charlie. Manufactured in the UK, sourced from Ghana, distributed globally as the tag. I am CEO and founder of the Constant Group and Move Me Back. Fundamentally, my goal is to build the human infrastructure that Africa needs to drive its social and economic development. And actually, Move Me Back, which is one of our portfolio companies, is focused and has been focused for the last decade on reconnecting Africa's strongest people, its strongest talent, what we call the architects of the African dream, the top 1% skilled, back to the continent in whatever way that may be. And what we've realized over time actually is, people think of moving back as something physical, but actually, we've realized that there is a deeper purpose there. We're actually moving people back to their purpose. And that's what this is ultimately all about. I'm excited about this conversation because you read it in the headlines, whether it's in the African press, but actually more likely in the international press. But Africa is the future in terms of its population, in terms of their demographics. And I think that's true. But the reality is, I believe it's every child's right to fulfill their purpose and to realize their potential. And if I look around the world, I think nowhere is that least the case on the African continent. And so we need to solve that. And solving that looks like actually harnessing its top asset, which is its people, wherever they are. And so this is a conversation around, realizing and accepting what the reality is and making sure that actually wherever people are, we can tap into the value of the African people.
Awesome. And last but not least, Tessa.
Hello, my name is Tessa Adamu. So I'm based in Manchester in the UK. I'm an international trade professional, also director of growth at ETK Group. which is a UK-based company. We specialize in African market entry and expansion. And I guess one of our powers, similar to Charles, is that we are based in the diaspora, but we have strong links or connections back home, which help us facilitate, I guess, that network or partnership where people are looking to maybe explore business opportunities on the continent with the, I guess, the connections that we have in both the UK where we're based or around Europe, whether it's US as well, and also the connections that we have in Africa. It actually enables us to create that value and kind of seamless link when doing business. So I guess this conversation is quite, I guess, close to myself in terms of how I operate. And just to also let people know that as Africans in the diaspora, it is possible to still have a strong connection back home. And also whether that's a professional or a personal business connection, it is possible. So I guess, yeah, that's one thing which I would like to kind of drive home today in terms of people think because you're miles away, that connection kind of leaves or dies. But yeah, it's not the case.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for your intros. And as you can see, they're all dispersed across the continent. So, but before we get into the policy and systems, let's talk about the human journey. And, this is all about the lived experiences. So I'm going to start with Camille, and I want everyone to answer this question. What does not beaten, not quitting mean to you personally? Camille?
That's a great question. As a mom of 3 Gen Zs and volunteer of over 18,000 hours across the entire globe, right? Asia Pacific, MENA region, the US, the Americas, Europe, and are near and dear to my heart, Africa. I have seen where there's diaspora across all these regions. They are, I think I read something that talked about how much in remittance goes back to the continents in the billions, right? And so what resonates with me is, what if those billions of dollars is already going to our people gets repurposed as investments? Because that number is so large, it exceeds any other funding that is going to the continent. And so in terms of my lived experience, I too give back. I too, try to make a difference. And so collectively, as you're working with young people, and I have hundreds of mentees that I partner with across the world. And in my experience, believing once a young person believes and gets the opportunity to see themselves as a leader, that's where the transformation starts, because then they recognize that they can also make an impact no matter how small. And that is the true thing, is for them to be able to look in the mirror and identify themselves as a leader and recognize that they themselves are the builder and co-creators of their own destiny. And a part of that destiny is being able to give back to those that have paved the road for them as well.
Yeah. Considering the theme that we're discussing today, definitely we've seen that young people are putting their foot forward. They are interested in contributing, to the development of Africa. And I'm sure that this conversation will be able to also unlock and give us the opportunity to be able to unpack most of the things that we're seeing, and also how we can continue to drive this forward as well. Thank you.
Yeah, Tessa, Charles, who wants to go next?
Yeah, I don't mind. From your question in terms of not beating, not quitting, if I take from a personal kind of perspective, as someone from the diaspora, parents, grandparents moving to the UK, seeing how things were challenging in the beginning, how they kind of persevered, pushed through, built foundations for future generations to make it a little bit easier for us coming through. There were challenges. They could have been beaten, they could have quit, but they didn't. So from a personal perspective, that's how I would kind of perceive it. From a business perspective, in terms of what we do at ETK, helping businesses enter the African continent, we always approach it from like a long-term perspective, and also very transparent in terms of many of the challenges and hurdles that people will face. But obviously this is a long-term play in terms of wanting to create something sustainable that adds value to the continent as well. And once you pass those challenges and understand some of the nuances and how the market operates, the value and opportunities are quite vast. and they're not the opportunities that that are seen in many other continents. So I guess that was how I would perceive it from a business perspective in terms of doing business in Africa. It can be challenging. It's a long-term play. It's very strategic as well in terms of how you approach it. But if you have a very short-term perspective, you can be easily beaten and you probably will quit. So I guess that's my approach.
All right, thank you. So not beaten, not quitting. What does it mean to me? I mean, when I read that, I think the story hasn't been written yet, or it's certainly not been concluded. And I think that is the story of Africa. I think it's very easy for us to give our own individual lifetimes a huge amount of significance, but it's a long story that's about to be written. We have to remember the African continent is a very young continent in terms of the countries that are formed today. And in 50 years ago, the likes of South Korea and in Singapore were net benefactors of aid. Now they are contributors, right? And I think we'll see the same pattern happen with the African continent. It will happen region by region, country by country, but that's the trajectory that we're on. And I think there's no other way that sort of brings it to life for me than to actually think of the African spirit. So about 3-4 years ago, we were doing a branding exercise with one of an international branding organization. They were not African; they're actually an American firm. And the power of that was we brought someone in who didn't really have the context of Africa. And in doing the interviews and understanding, the spirit of the African people, one thing emerged, and one thing that was quite interesting, which is when you speak with Africans all across the continent, wherever they are, there is this almost what seems unhealthy and almost delusional belief and hope that everybody has, right? Which is this idea that, hey, progress at some point, progress will be made. Doesn't matter, there are the various challenges that the continent has been through. Ultimately, you have people who believe, who have hope, who see the continent one day emerging and rising. And I think that is the spirit of the African individual. So wherever you find Africans when they're given access, whether it's in academia in the US, whether it's in sport across the world, Africans will excel. And there is this, this drumbeat within, the African psyche that ultimately is pushing for more, has this belief. The Nigerians say, how far, which is a question of progress. What progress have you made today? As Ghanaians, we're always talking about, in good time, this will happen. So that's what it means to me, not beaten, not quitting.
So to keep the conversation going, we're going to widen the lens a little bit, right? There is this belief, especially for those of us in the diaspora, that is unspoken in many conversations. And the idea is that if you're not physically in Africa, you can't really have an impact. That distance equates to disconnection. But yet, as Camille mentioned earlier, there's now recorded remittances going back to the diaspora of over $100 billion every year, which is dwarfing venture capital funding. So who is actually really investing in the continent, right? Let's talk about that. And this question is open to all the speakers again. But based on this belief, this notion about the diaspora, especially being able to go back and have impact, what do you think is actually true? Is there a way to have impact on the development of Africa from abroad? Or is that a comfortable notion that the diaspora has used as an excuse to some extent? And anyone can take this.
So what I will say is that in my experience as a board member for JA Africa, and what I've seen in our young people, and how, over the last 8 years, I volunteered in the region. I'm originally from Jamaica. And I fell in love with Africa from my earlier years. My dad teaching me about Marcus Garvey and the Black Star Liner and all things African. And so I was that, bright-eyed young girl wanting to learn more about the stories that my father told me. And so my passion started 18 years ago, volunteering for junior achievement within my region of Greater Washington, and then meeting someone that's within my region. Like, you're always here volunteering. Like, is there anything I can do for you, Camille? Because one of the finance parks were literally 10 minutes from my home. And I said, you know what I dream of? I dream of being in the motherland. I dream of Africa. And you're all getting me emotional when I say this. And so he said, I know someone. And at that time was Elizabeth Ilango Bincliffe, who was the CEO and president of JA Africa at that time. And that was a friend of hers, and he connected us. And from that connection, I fall deeper and deeper in love with Africa, because I do believe firmly in the potential of all young people. But where I see statistically where our African youth have been marginalized or disfranchised, I see where when you stack them against other young people, they soar and they rise. Right. And so leadership development is at the core of that. And if we give our young people the opportunity for leadership development and we pour into them, they become unstoppable. And they don't have to physically be on the continent when they get scholarships and stuff to be able to give back. There is a thinking, a mobility thinking. It's not necessarily physical, it's cognitive, right? The ability to be able to give back to the continent without physically being there. And that could be through mentorship, right? That could be physically giving, right? That $95 billion plus in remittances that are going to the continent being converted to investments. That could be through leadership development. Again, so someone saying, oh, I don't know if I can be physically on the continent, right? That's just an excuse. You don't have to physically be there. How are you helping someone else in your stead, right? How are you making a difference? And we know that every incremental change in the right direction creates a ripple effect long term. And it's just being determined and intentional. I think that's the word, right? Being intentional, not to make excuse, being intentional to know that you don't want to leave not one child behind. And so instead of making an excuse of what is not happening, being intentional and saying, how can I give back? And so that was a part of my story of saying, hey, I'm dreaming about Africa and I want to make a difference. And that initial was just me giving physically funds, but that translated to me physically now being a part of an amazing organization that is transforming hundreds of thousands of lives. And we see where those lives, it's just not one life, right? It impacts their family, it impacts their community, and then we're seeing the ripple effects of a continental shift because we have the entrepreneurial spirit, whether it's a woman on the street side selling something to feed her families, or someone in a larger corporation with this mindset. So just wanted to share that perspective as well, because that belief, that leadership development in our young people, that's what I'm seeing with intentionality that they're leveraging and bringing back and giving back, whether it's physical, but I believe it's also a cognitive mindset shift.
Okay, and so I think that's a good perspective to take on, because like you said, there's other ways to give back without being on ground. Tessa, this question is for you. From a trade and business perspective, does capital and expertise from abroad translate into real economic transformation, or do you actually have to be on ground again for that to take effect?
Oh, interesting question. I guess for me, let me try and answer this as directly as possible. Yeah, capital does matter. Do you have to be directly on the ground yourself? No, but you have to have an awareness and a strong partnership or people on the ground who can enable you to access those opportunities and also mobilize those opportunities and implement the ideas or the business or whatever strategies that you're planning to implement on the ground. And that's not just something that happens within the African continent. You know, I've done business or international trade. Obviously, the last 10, 15 years has been a direct focus on the African continent because it's where I've always wanted to kind of focus. But before that, I was doing business in Southeast Asia. Similar situation. If you don't have a presence, strong partnerships on the ground, those ideas very rarely come to fruition. But I think that sometimes brings a negative connotation when you're speaking about doing business in Africa. People think, oh, because I have to be on ground, it means that it's extremely risky. No, that's just the realities of international trade, international business. If you're building a house in the UK, you still have to go view the house and make sure that the builders are following through the plans, things are being done, the budget is being kind of spent in the right places, the right time, at the right quality. Same thing if you're doing business, whether it's in Africa, China, the US. Do you have to be there yourself? No, but it would help if you had a strong partnership or presence on the ground in the continent. But as I say, that is not Africa specific.
Yeah, well said. Oh, was someone going to
point out just generally around just framing this conversation around people being on the ground or not. I think the reality is we need to accept that this is not something that's going away. If anything, it's probably going to increase, especially as the African population increases. And there are some realities that we just need to kind of bottom out. So the first is no world-class economy develops by trapping its people, internally, locally, right? We look at even China's rise, and actually what we've had is state-sponsored migration for people to upskill, educate themselves, and bring that back, right? So, I mean, that in itself gives us a clue as to what we need to be looking at from an African perspective. But that's the first thing. And the second thing is, for as much as we all sit here and we are contributing our efforts to what we believe is a higher cause, individuals fundamentally solve for themselves first, right? And people will go wherever they feel there is opportunity. Currently, for whatever reason, many of Africa's brightest talent do not believe that in the short term, at least, the African continent is the place where they're going to reach the next stage in their development path. And so that's also something we need to look at. And then finally, I think what's important to recognize is that people will ultimately shift themselves to wherever they need to be based on where they feel the opportunity exists. If that is on the continent, it will be on the continent. And of course, Africans have a competitive advantage. If you can do it in your own backyard, you will. So what all of this means for us is that if these trends are increasing and they're not going away anytime soon, we need to be thinking around, if we have African talent all over the world and they're involved in various different initiatives, whether it's Africa leaning on or not, what are the inroads and what is the infrastructure that we can build to ensure that all of these people maintain some level of connectivity with the African continent, they remain visible to their countries, and most importantly, that their activity contributes in a net positive way to the economies of our continent.
Well, I think that's a perfect way to just transition into the next part of this conversation, which is the infrastructures, right? What systems are in place to actually keep this conversation or, turn the brain drain into a brain gain. Let's say that a couple of times and then it starts to jumble up. So we all talked about personal journeys and the real tensions that we all wrestle with making that transition to Africa or being in the diaspora and giving back, right? But there's also the circulation that's structural, right? The whole process of, again, leaving and flowing back when you've left the continent. But what are we actually building on a macro level? I think, Charles, you actually started you started the conversation, which is what are the infrastructures we have in place? And I'm going to start with you. If we talk about talent circulation in your ecosystem, what does that look like? What does Move Me Back? How does Move Me Back turn the brain drain into something more intentional?
Yeah, so I think I look at this from many different angles, and it's not just a diaspora angle. It is across the entire spectrum. I think when we talk about infrastructure, we always default to power infrastructure, roads, electricity, various different things that we have grown to know. But I actually believe the next frontier for the continent and the things we need to solve for is the human infrastructure, human talent infrastructure, which is what is the operating system for African talent, not just the individuals like the ones on this call who have access internationally, but also, the average person on the street, the lady who works in the market stall. All of those people have raw capability and are all contributors to the growth and development of an economy. And what are we doing to ensure that there is a way in which we can identify, we can access, and we can give opportunity to those profiles? I think specifically when we look at brain drain, brain gain, people often think about talent returning home. I like to flip that on its head and say that I think what the measure of brain gain is when people who are local and who live on the continent don't feel a pressure to actually leave, right?
Yeah.
When you start to really see brain drain, when that starts to happen, then actually what you're going to see is the flows of people, not just Africans, and we get this already to some degree, the flows of people coming back into the continent. But for me right now, what really is necessary is we are 1.4 billion, 1.5 billion. We're going to be 4 billion by the end of the century. We're going to be 2.5 billion by 2050, 2055. It's way too many people not to have a way in which we measure ourselves and measure our talent. And so specifically, I just want to end on the fact that what my goal is and what I think we need to all be solving for is when you think of that population, which will probably represent 40-50% of the world's population at some point in the future, how are we making sure that the potential that every single person has is captured in a way that can be used, whether it's used at home, whether it's used in the next city, whether it's used in the next region, whether it's used internationally? And then how do we create the infrastructure that ensures that not only can we identify this, not only can we train it, not only can we access it, but we can also ensure that the economic benefits that these individuals create flow back home. And I think Moving Back is one small microcosm of that, which is it's specifically targeted at the top, what we say, 0.1% of individuals economically, because there is a belief that these are the people who will start the wave. These are the individuals who, through fortune or through whatever it is, have been given the access, have got access to information, people, capital, and can kickstart that movement. And the reality is, in order for us to make the most of those people, we've got to create a platform which is flexible. We've got to create mechanisms which are flexible, which allows every single individual to live their own individual dream, but in a way that ensures that the net effect of their work flows back to the continent.
I love what you said about the fact that if you do target the top 1% economically and they can get back home to the continent, they can start a wave, and then of course they can still follow their dreams, but also make a difference. So question to everyone on the panel, is it possible for Africa to actually create its own mobility corridors, like, Lagos to Nairobi or Kigali, or do we have to keep defaulting to the Western countries like the UK, Northern America, the US? Thoughts?
I'll try to chime in here, and then others can chime in after. I would say that we do not have to depend on others. We can lead. Brain gain is truly not a miracle, right? I believe there's some architecture that's involved in that, and but we do need the systems, right? And our systems need to be ready. If we have the systems in place, then we'll be able to support the talent. As Charles said, let's start with home. Let's make sure that we're taking care of that first. And so I think from my background and expertise in governance, I would say stronger governance indices are necessary, right? And that will correlate to maybe 40 to 60% higher retention of skilled workers. I was in Abuja last week for our JA Africa Company of the Year competition, and I immerse myself in all things news. I generally don't listen to the news, but I was listening just to get a pulse of what was happening. And one of the opportunities that came up as I was listening to the news is how we need to really invest in our talent that is already here. And Charles alluded to that earlier. So stronger governance is needed, right? We do not have to depend if there's some things that we need to do a collaboration or shared knowledge. We have enough folks in the diaspora, as well as those that are on the ground, that if we come together in unity to really tackle this problem, we have all we need to really solve it internally, if we really come together, and as well as the dollars also support that. And I shared the statistics earlier. The other thing that I would say, innovation from an innovation ecosystem perspective, if we invest at least, we're currently investing less than 1% in the GDP, and we see globally that investment is on average 2.2%. So can you imagine if we as a diaspora, those that are on the ground, on the continent, invest in the way that they should, then the return is going to be greater, right? Talent cannot land where innovation cannot grow. And so we want to make sure that we are creating the environment conducive for that growth. That R&D, investing in R&D where we can. And then the third thing that I would call out is the return pathways. I know we say that, folks don't have to necessarily return. We could start developing on the ground. Yes. But if we have pathways that are structured, and I said it earlier, through mentorship, through fellowships, re-entry pathways that could really incentivize those that are in this diaspora to come back. We can see cross-border leadership pipelines being developed, and that would certainly create a lift. We do not have to have any Westerners come in and take care of what we can take care of ourselves. Thank you.
Moment to actually bring in Ola, who is the co-founder of Doing Good Work in Africa. She's already built something that is modeling what we're talking about. So Ola, if you could just briefly tell us, your experience and, how you've been able to take that model and turn distance into an asset versus just a barrier.
Thank you, Lola. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, I'm really excited we're having this conversation, and I think in emails and in conversations with each person on this call, it has just resonated the kind of work that they're doing, and given me even strength in the work that DOA is doing. In a gathering a few weeks ago, somebody asked me if I was bullish on Africa. And by nature, the first thing you want to say, yes, of course I'm bullish on Africa. But then you start to think about the things that are on ground, the lack of infrastructure, the gap in access to tech, right? And then the big elephant in the room, trust deficit. And you're like, oh my God, right? But then I go back and I think about people. I think about the people on this stage with me talking. I think about the people that I've met across Africa and in the diaspora that are doing amazing work, some in silos. I think about the students that have participated in the DOA initiatives, who have refused to quit no matter where they are in the world. I mean, I hear Camille's story for the first time. I hear Charlie's story for the first time. I hear, Barnabas' story for the first time, and Tessa's story, and like people who have refused to quit wherever in the world to make a difference. And that's exactly why DOA was built, right? And we were talking about people being on ground, whether physical and being able to make an impact. And I think the opposite is true, right? I think we've been able to prove through some of the conversations we're having that distance can actually be an asset, right? It just has to be designed for it. We have diaspora students on one side that yearn to be connected to Africa in a meaningful way, that they have global exposure, they have technical skills, they have networks that many African startups would never have access to, right? And what DOA is doing is creating that structured pathway through like a DOA virtual internship. And suddenly that opens up, geography stops being a barrier, talent flows, idea flows, confidence flows, and this circulation becomes catalytic. If that's a word. And I'll give you an example. Like what we've learned is that there's no magic to it. It's I think Camille mentioned or talked about this, and Charlie also mentioned it, and people made references to this. There's no magic to it. It's structure, is accountability, is intention, is transparency, creating clear roles for students, clear roles for the organizations that we're connecting them to, real projects, real mentorship, real deliverables. And then when you start to put all these pieces together, you see something really powerful. You have young people, whether in Boston, in Toronto, in London, in Japan, contributing directly to innovation in Lagos, in Nairobi, in Kigali. And they don't have to wait to move to the continent. Sorry, I'm being so passionate about this. They don't have to wait to move to the continent, right? And I'll give examples. I know we're short for time. Ayo, who is Nigerian by descent, was going to Drexel University, did an internship with Innovex, which is an energy startup in Kampala, Uganda. And one of the pain points they identified that he was able to contribute to was that IoT testing solution was taking weeks on end. When Ayo joined them for an 8 to 10 week internship, he was able to shorten that testing time from several weeks to a few hours. Now think about what that means for that startup. Think about what it means for them to get their solution to market faster. Think about what that means for that community where Innovex is from. Think about what it means for them to be able to expand and scale and be able to employ people in their community, to be able to export their solution to other parts of Africa and outside of Africa. Now think about what this means for Ayo in the diaspora, a meaningful connection, an internship where he was able to make a great impact, that he can walk anywhere in confidence and speak to what he was able to do globally. Think about his career trajectory. Think about his future and what this means for him, being a future investor, a future advocate, a future innovator, a future Camille, a future Charlie, a future Tessa, a future Barnabas, a future Lola. So that's what we're building, and several others in this conversation are building, are those pathways for students or individuals that want to engage for the future of Africa, wherever they are, and for organizations to be able to scale to realize their full potential. And that's just one example. So to answer the question of that person that asked me if I was bullish on Africa, what I would say is, it's not a romanticism, optimism that I have. I am bullish on Africa. I'm bullish on seeing talent circulating, building, returning, investing in ways that we could not have imagined a decade ago. Thank you. I know that was a whole mouthful.
No, it's okay. It's a passion that drives everything. And I think that's just an example, again, of a platform that's doing the work that we're talking about. And for those of you who want to learn more about DOA, there will be a link to the DOA organization so you can get more information and understand, again, see more examples of what Ola just took some time to explain. So on LinkedIn, there is a conversation thread going. Please chime in. I mean, all the speakers are going to be connected on LinkedIn. Be sure to follow them if you're not following them already. We want to say thank you again to all the speakers. And again, continue the conversation. Do not let this be the end. I think there's a lot of thought starters that every single speaker has given, ways to give back, ways to not just give back in a monetary sense, but also just be part of the impact that we all talked about we want to see for the continent, whether you're in the US and the UK or on the ground. There are many ways to do that. And DOA is just one of those platforms. So I encourage everyone to just seek more information, keep the conversation going. And on that note, any final thoughts before we say bye to everyone?
I was going to just have Camille finish her thought. And I think
Thank you so much. What I was going to add to the conversation is saying, I think as we think about the future for our continent, we hire for character, right? And more so, we can train people to do whatever we would like for them to do. But I think what's most important is hiring for character. If you invest in bringing on board top talent, then that top talent will do exactly what it's designed to do versus trying to fix something or mitigate a risk after you have onboarded a person. I read a study about how much it cost a company to bring on, out of desperation, just anybody to your team, and then to backtrack and how much it will cost to offboard that person. And so companies lose in that regard. So from an HR perspective, again, all things governance and HR for me is let's make sure that we're hiring for character. And then we can cross-train as we need to, and bringing in the top talent we need to do the work and execute it in the manner in which we go. I think from that perspective, it's not an Africa versus Western sort of thing. It's more so hiring for the character, and the work will take care of itself. Thank you.
No, and I apologize. I think I was just trying to be respectful of our audience as well. So like I said, we can keep talking. And I think it just means that we have to have more series. So on that note,
I would just round that up, just in terms of what we've discussed, being that, we've learned that circulation doesn't happen by accident, is engineered. Some of the things that Camille just, called on, trusted structures I needed. We talked about ALA. We talked about, Move Me Back. We talked about, QTK and JA Achievement. There's a reason why those organizations were selected to be part of this conversation. is those are institutions that have been around and they've done great work, and there are pipelines to connect to how you can support someone that is looking to engage on the continent, including DOA, or how you can be that person, right? Start sharing. So I'm sure people are thinking, what can I do after this conversation? Share with students, share with founders, look at what do these programs need is to remove friction and to create awareness for all the different initiatives that these organizations that we're doing. When we start to, move those pieces, then we stop talking about brain drain, and we start seeing more brain gain in real time. So if you're thinking, what can I do? Leaving this, look into all the different organizations, see which one resonates with you, find ways you can volunteer, find ways you can share with a student or share with a founder the opportunities. There is something you can do today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.